Hi, this is Mark. In this video, I'm going to explain some key indications of whether or not you have a credible doctor or a doctor who's wanting to assist you in your current circumstances. Um, I've had bad experience in terms of working with doctors who fed me information that was false, or there was a lot of misinformation that was um, provided in our consultation session. And ultimately, we don't. When you go to consultation sessions or your doctor session, you don't, at least in my experience, don't spend a lot of time talking to a doctor. A lot of times will give you a medication and do a try and error approach until you solve some problem, but it only acts as a band-aid, and it could also cause new problems to arise. And there is some deception. There's always going to be some corruption, at least in terms of mental illness. A lot of the mental illnesses are inconsistent, and of course they leverage the insurance companies, or they provide a lot of income to the insurance companies because the quantity of mental illnesses or illnesses in general has skyrocketed in the past few decades. In fact, there's a disorder called oppositionally defined disorder that doesn't make any sense because anyone who's defined against authority figures could be just a teenager going through that phase of development and they have a higher probability of defying authority during that phase, and it doesn't indicate that they have ODD or oppositionally defined disorder, so therefore it's logically inconsistent and it doesn't have a high degree of precision. And when I went to, and of course, doctors nowadays, they can get through the educational system, and even in any field with good memory. If you have a good, strong memory, and you don't really have a strong interest, you're not going to try to connect the information that bridges between the concepts, because if you have a huge demand to store so much information, and the path of least resistance is through memory. If you want to do well on the exams, and doctors have to go through a rigorous system, and it's very difficult to get through to attain a high GPA unless you're studying uh, consistently and intensely, and you have to spend a lot of time, and it could be very difficult to try to go very deep and in depth, and because that takes a lot of time, and based on the sheer amount of information you have to compartmentalize in the brain, it just kind of prevents that from happening, or the motivation to do so. But then again, if the interest is high, you'll find a way to connect the information. And that's why, of course, it's along a spectrum. This interest exists along a spectrum. Not everyone is going to have high interest. So that's why, like with doctors, they like I went to one doctor, and he mentioned I need to get my cholesterol rechecked because it's going to be off the charts, or it's going to be extremely high because I consumed 8 scrambled eggs that morning. They tell you you're not supposed to consume cholesterol before the test. Well, I was like, screw this, I'm consuming cholesterol. I know it's not going to affect my cholesterol. And I argued with the doctor I told him, we're going to get my cholesterol checked. I know it's not going to be high because in the reason, I had that belief. And the reason I did so is because why would something that has such a high nutrient density, such as egg yolks, be so detrimental to cholesterol? If that were true, a lot of people would be dying from heart disease. A lot of people would be dying. But every food has a ratio, nutrient ratio. You can consider it the golden ratio. Mathematically, it's in perfect proportion for your body to balance, to attain equilibrium. Eggs also contain choline, which helps you metabolize cholesterol. And there is a reason why there's choline. Otherwise, if it didn't exist, you would run risk of high cholesterol levels. There's always a balancing, something that balances uh, the nutrient or all the nutrients as a whole. And it basically, if you take nutrient isolation, it can cause imbalances. And we've learned that with multivitamins, humans do not know the proper ratios. No one, we don't fully understand the mechanisms for cholesterol production, but it just doesn't make sense that consuming cholesterol, or in the form of egg yolks, will cause your cholesterol to skyrocket when the liver manufactures cholesterol. And your liver is the one organ that you produces cholesterol based on the demands of the body. You need cholesterol to create hormones, and everyone has a different sensitivity, hormone or receptivity level. And when the sensitivity of your receptors is higher, you don't need a high supply of hormones. So to, your body downregulates the hormone production when sensitivity increases. And therefore, if you don't need a higher supply, your cholesterol would probably lower. And because you don't need that much demand. And your liver will, when it's in a healthy state, it will produce an optimal amount of cholesterol. And egg yolks are extremely healthy for the liver. Choline is a nutrient that helps prevent liver fat because it helps metabolize the fat and the cholesterol or fatty acids. And that's why when I consumed eggs and I argued with the doctor who told me my cholesterol is going to be off the charts, he gave me misinformation if I went with that and believed it. Think about it. It's just like I would be consuming, if I consumed eggs, I'd be consuming egg whites. I'd be living in fear that, and ultimately that fear would actually cause my cholesterol to increase. Anxiety, stress causes your cholesterol to increase much more than eating a few egg yolks. And of course, there's moderation. You got to consume in moderation. Whatever, you don't want to consume beyond what the liver can process. And that would also increase cholesterol. Even consuming way too many calories will increase cholesterol. Too many carbs will. Anything that damages the liver will offset the cholesterol balance. So that was one instance. Then I went to another doctor who, they were talking about how I have heartburn or acid reflux. And he straight up told me, he based it on studies. He didn't even list the study, but he's like, based on this study, your stomach does not need acid reflux. Or, I mean, not. Your stomach does not need hydrochloric acid. And of course, your stomach does need acid reflux because that can cause gastritis and other problems. But he said it doesn't need acid or hydrochloric acid, and it just didn't make any sense. I was like, why would if your stomach does not need hydrochloric acid, why does your stomach produce hydrochloric acid in the first place? It doesn't make any logical sense. I mean, I just debated with him, and I don't know, I had a fun time doing so. And not that I don't want to. It's not like I have all the answers, but you gotta test these doctors. You have to put them to the test. Ask some questions. Some do some a little bit do some research. You don't want to blindly believe what they tell you. There's good doctors out there, of course. There's doctors who actually care, and a good indication of whether they care or want to help is that they actually sit down and give you the reasoning behind your problems. They actually try to solve it like it's a puzzle. The medical field, solving all these medical problems is like a puzzle. And it's it's something, it's like a detection, a game of where you're trying to find the criminal, and you're trying to find all the evidence that leads down that stream. It's the same way, it's just different. And you got to find a doctor who's willing to break down the concepts into easily digestible parts, simplify it, not overly complicated so it can be deceptive. I think I don't know if it was Einstein, but you truly know that someone understands uh, a difficult concept when they can shift it and simplify it to so that everyone can understand it. Because complexity, it's so many layers. There's so many layers of complexity. When you learn a concept, it's very chaotic at first, but as you understand it, it becomes simplified over time. And you're not going to fully simplify it, but that's how it goes. If you don't truly understand it, it stays complex. You only can manage the expression of the concept itself, the initial expression, which, any concept can be initially complex. Any concept that we learn when we're young, you're a baby, you're not going to, it's going to be very difficult. Like a lot of the new concepts that you learn are initially complex, but then they become simplified, then they become manageable. And the more you delve into it, it becomes, you learn more, and you eventually starting to converge towards an absolute simplicity. Not that we're ever going to get there, but that's the thing. You want a doctor who can actually talk, and who they're excited to actually go through the uh, concepts with you, because they're not going to be impatient. Impatience is inversely proportional to interest level. That's what I find. If you actually plot this as a function, you're going to find this correlation, and I believe it's a very strong correlation. If you have if you are very patient with something, you want to spend a lot more time, and you don't get emotional over it, because impatient reaction is emotion. And another factor, like I had a mathematics professor who got impatient with me because he wanted to delve into his research, his interest. He didn't want to deal with simple math in his eyes and through his lens, because it wasn't interested. He was interested in his research. Therefore, he became very impatient very quickly. So it kind of shows, when you it's based on your desire for something. And so if a doctor can actually spend more time and can invest that time, it's a good indication. And that's just what I find. If they just spit out information without giving you the reasoning, that's a red flag right there. Big red flag. If you ask some questions and they kind of deviate from that, that's a red flag. You gotta watch out, especially because doctors can have a lot of massive repository of information, but they have to be able to be willing to connect the information. And I think if there's a busy schedule, stress, they may not have the time to do so. And of course, any doctor can have false information and not know. I mean, no one's going to be perfect. So, but I think the key indication is, even if they do make a mistake, if anyone makes a mistake, you got to be willing, if they're willing to at least admit and work and manage and work with you. That's the key pointer. I've had too many doctors who try to just say, it's this is what you have, this is what you have. It's just trial and error. It's guesstimation. And if it's just if you just throw it up in the air without actually narrowing in on the evidence, or narrowing in um, intensely, you're just going to go bounce around like a billiards ball. You're just going to go in so many different directions, radio directions, and then you're going to get diagnosed with this, and then you're going to get diagnosed with this, and then you're going to realize it was incorrect, and you're going to get diagnosed with this disorder and then this disorder. This pattern has been so consistent. I've noted so many people, they spend 30 years, 40 years before they get diagnosed with what they think is the correct disorder at the time, but they go through medication after medication after medication. Medication is important for, of course, certain disorders, but it is by no means. I mean, there's a lot of problems, that can occur due to medication, and I think if a doctor has a good wealth of information on the side effects, and like what you're going to deal with, and they actually go over this, and like the risk assessment and everything, it can build more trust, rather than someone who just gives you a medication blind, just tells you to do this without really a good explanation or thorough uh, synopsis of the potential risks, or what conditions, or at least why they prescribe this medication relative to other medications. There needs to be always the why, rather than the what or the how. You need to know why something occurs, and I think that's important. When a doctor focuses on the why, they'll be willing to investigate it and actually there shows they're interested in looking deeper into the problem at hand. But yeah, that's just how I view it. There's going to be good doctors out there. There's going to be it's always a spectrum. There's good engineers. There's engineers who really are in not her. They just lack the interest, but they got into the field maybe because their parents told them or so forth. And there's other engineers who were born like they to do so. They were just always invested, and they spent their whole life thinking about engineering. There's any interest. You may not align with your interests, like your career may not be aligned perfectly with your interest either. So, with any field, there's going to be discrepancies, or there's going to be a spectrum of differences. And there's there's doctors who are maybe miserable in that position. They do it, they get by, but it's just, you never know. You just go in the field, and you may not know until once you get the job that you truly should, continue going that route. And that's just life in general, but you just got to find ways to navigate through these circumstances without um, getting deceived. So it's always good to have some knowledge base. You don't have to have wealth of information, but it's good to have some knowledge base before entering the field. I think in any situation, because and then if you become naive, or if you're easier to become taken advantage of in situations like that, because a lot of times you're so much information is funneled at you at a given time. And if you don't really know about the field, it's just going to be overbearing, at first. So if there's so many details being spit out at a given frame, or spouted at you, it's just going to cause processing overload. And at least for me, I have to internalize first. So I have to take the information and maybe not. Uh, I think extroverts may have an advantage with fluidity of, you know, be able to, or they're going to have more. It's going to be more fluid in approach when they're socializing or trying to understand something. It's back and forth. It occurs usually at a faster rate, whereas an introvert has to really internalize before they proceed. So, um, yeah, that's just what how I view the situation, and what you can do to, um, or how you can dictate or determine whether or not you're dealing with a credible um, doctor. It's again, it's credibility has to do a lot with um, interest and how much time you actually invested in the study and connecting the information. So that's the key. And yeah, that's all I have. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next